Welcome back everyone, for those who are here this morning, and welcome to all others who weren't here this morning for the first lecture. I am Eirikr, here is Þorgeirr, here's my camera, here is his, and we'll be talking about Viking combat with sword and shield. What we are doing is called HIMA, that's Historical European Martial Arts, and this is research on martial arts of Europe from the Middle Ages on, and our primary point of interest with Þorgeirr is obviously Viking combat. So we will start by presenting you the two weapons in details, the sword and the shield. Then we will explain you how we can try to reconstruct Viking fighting techniques. Then we explain you what are the core principles we found to be most important when fighting with sword and shield. And we will end up by showing you several more advanced techniques that we are able to reconstruct and to adapt to the weapons of the Vikings.
Right, so I will begin by explaining the sword. So this is a sword, Viking sword. It's not sharp, obviously, but it's still a simple sword. It has a blade and a hilt. So the hilts of the Viking sword is typically very short, like this one. The later ones are bigger, but this one is short. And the pommel is typical from the Viking age, so it's flat near the hand and it's semicircular or with small lobes on the other end. There is still one problem with this sword. Can someone guess what it is? No? No one? The handle is actually too long. The handle of the Viking sword should be just long enough for my hand to fit in. Here you have 3 to 4 centimeters too big. I have this long handle because in my youth I did reenactment quite heavily and I had big padded gloves, so I needed the space to fit my hand. Now I don't do that anymore, and I will soon change sword. Whatever. So. What's important with the sword is that it is light, contrarily to what you could think. In Hollywood you see big battles with huge weapons and striking everything. This is not true. A sword is light. A sword is around 1 kilo. So it is light and it is well balanced. The point of balance of a Viking sword is around here. So well balanced. Later ones are, in the medieval age, the later ones are more well balanced, as we could say, closer to the end, but that's just because you were using more the point of your sword, so you need to be very quick and agile with the point. The Viking sword was more of a cutting weapon, so you need more weight in the blade to be able to cut effectively. So it's not a perfect balance as modern fencing would tell you, but it's still a very good balance for what it is intended to do. Right, now the sword was expensive at this time. Why? Because it was difficult to make. It requires quite a lot of metal. Metal was kind of expensive at this time. A sword the price of a sword would be between 4 and 8 cows. Just one sword. That's quite a lot of money. And only the metal does not explain all the price. What explains the price is the amount of work needed to make a sword, because the steel at this time was not modern time quality. It was not great. Why? Because they didn't have the knowledge to finely tune the carbon content of the steel, because it's the amount of carbon in the iron that makes the good quality steel, and also because they were not able to remove all the impurities from the iron ore. So what that meant is that if you took just a single piece of steel in the Middle Ages and made a blade out of it, you strike once and either your sword is bent or it is broken. So it's bad. And to avoid that, they needed to do much more advanced forging technique, for example pattern welded steel, where they put several layers of different types of steel, welded in the forge together, twisted, welded again to make the core of the sword so that it was flexible and springy and would not break. And sometimes they added harder parts to make the edge so that they had they could keep a good edge. The best, and these pattern welded swords were what you see sometimes in museum, etc. The very beautiful patterns on the sword. That's where it comes from. On the other hand, the pattern welded sword were not the best sword around. The best sword around, like the Ulfbert, I don't know if anyone heard of the name before, were actually made in a single piece of steel, but it was a very high quality steel. So high quality that actually the European didn't know how to make such a steel, and you'd have to wait for the 19th century to be able to do this. So how did they find the steel? Actually, they imported the steel from the Middle East, where they had the technology to make what's called crucible steel, which was much higher quality. So actually the Viking did go all the way to the Middle East, took the steel, brought it back, perhaps gave the steel to the Franks to make the blades, because the Franks were very good smiths, then took back the blade in Scandinavia and made the fittings. World trade even is at this period. So this is it for sword.
Yeah, now all you ever wanted to know about the shield and were afraid to ask. So the shield of the Viking, of course, is the famous round shield with a central iron boss. It is center gripped. Here we have a center grip running all through the shield. The shield is made of planks of wood glued together on the sides. Usually it's a single layer, although the texts, some laws from Norway tell us that the best shields should be made of what they call twiburð, which means double board. So a bit like plywood, it should be 2 layers of boards, except that we found no archaeological evidence for such shields. All the shields we found had only 1 layer of planks, so for some reason, we don't know why, they were maybe too lazy to make this double layered shield. The wood used for the shield had to be light, because you don't want your shield to be too heavy in your hand. So most of the time the wood was pine or spruce, because it's growing everywhere here and it's light wood. But all of you who worked with wood in your life know that pine and spruce are very likely to split along the fibers when you hit that. So it makes for quite fragile planks. And the best shields, again, according to text, should be made out of lime wood, except that again we found no archaeological evidence for lime wood shields. So either they were very rare or absent. And again, we don't really know why, because the good point with lime wood is that it's almost as light as pine or spruce, but it splits much less. Now, these planks are held together, as I said, by gluing them on the edges, but also by this center grip, which runs all through the shield and hold the planks together. Sometimes you also have such reinforcement here to help holding the planks together. The shield has a lining on the front, sometimes on the back too, out of fabric or leather, which is again glued to again help keeping the planks together. And it has a rim, which is either leather or rawhide, and when this rim is put on wet and it dries, it compresses all the planks together. So again, the goal here is to keep the planks together. The rim is either nailed like here, but most likely actually it was stitched like on this shield, because on the shield we found usually we find the holes in the wood, but we don't find any nails, so that suggests stitching. And sometimes we had metal clamps around the edge that were used to reinforce, probably to reinforce the weak spots of the shield, like the junction of the planks or the junction of the rimming. Now the size of the shield. Viking shields had a quite large range of sizes, from 60 centimeters in diameter to 110, but most of them fall into the 75 to 90 centimeter range. Of course, the size of a shield depends on the size of the bearer. If you are a tall guy, you need a large shield to protect your large body. So this leads us to the question, how tall were the Vikings? Very often we think that medieval people were short, and that's wrong. From skeletons we can draw statistics on the size of people, and we can tell, for example, that the average Scandinavian male from the 10th century would have been something like 1 meter 74 or 75, which is actually my size. Þorgeirr here is slightly taller than that, but if I have this 80 centimeter shield here with my 1 meter 75, that's the perfect proportions for a shield on a Viking, because I'm a perfect Viking. You were supposed to laugh here. No, whatever. This is 80 centimeters. Our other shields are slightly smaller, maybe 77 or 75 centimeters. The last point is the thickness of the shield. The shields, again, there's quite a broad range. The thinner we found was about half a centimeter, and the thickest was 3 centimeters, which is extremely thick and extremely heavy. And we don't really know how such a heavy shield would have been handled, but most of them are between 8 and 15 millimeters. Our shields are about 1 centimeter thick, which makes for shields that weight around, ours are between 3.5 and 4.5 kilograms. So we expect that the average Viking shield would have weighted that much. And what's more important, that they were very often chamfered, so that the wood was getting thinner toward the edges to make for a lighter shield. And you know that anyway your edges are going to be damaged, so you make them slightly thinner, and you keep the thick wood where your hand and arm are, because you want to protect yourself better in the center. But all in all, the Viking shield, for its size, because it's a big shield for its times, it's quite light for its size again, but of course much heavier than a sword. But it's because of this small weight, it's quite fragile. And for example, those of you who know about the Holmgang, which is a ritual duel of the Vikings, in the Holmgang you are supposed to bring 3 shields with you, because they were likely to shatter during the duel. So you had you are likely to destroy up to 3 shields in a single duel. That's so, well, okay. I didn't make it on purpose. Okay, so now that we know everything about the 2 weapons, the big question is, how do we use them? And the big answer to that big question is we don't know.
That's not the end of the talk, obviously, because we can still say something. So, why don't we know exactly how they did fight? Well, we have no evidence, actually. The only thing we found are rusty swords, rusty bosses of shields, and some skeletons with wounds on the bones, and that's it. The closest thing we have in time about the Viking fighting are the sagas, Icelandic sagas, for example, which were written like 2 to 3 centuries later in the 13th century. Moreover, it's literary works, so there may be some artistic distortion in the text, so we need to be careful here. So what we're doing and what we're using to recreate the techniques are actually quite simple. The first thing is what we call biomechanics, that is simple physical laws. As we said, the Vikings were much different from us, and as far as we know, the laws of physics didn't change from the 10th century to now. So we can use that. We can use the first principle, for example, is a simple leverage. If I put the tip of my sword near his hand, I can push. Oh, he won't budge. On the other hand, if he tries to move, I can't resist. So this is why we call the part of the blade that is closest to our hand the strong part, the strong of the blade, and the tip, near the tip, it is called the weak, for obvious reasons. So, for example, this is a later technique, fencing technique, but it's still applicable. If I strike here, it will parry my weak with the strong. If he does the opposite, here, he can't resist. So he needs to do that. Moreover, here, as you can see, he's menacing me with his point. I cannot divert his point like this because my weak is in his strong, but I can invert the situation by taking his weak with my strong. Very easy. Right, so that was strong and weak. There is another principle, which is edge and flat. The edge has the advantage against the flat. Here he can't resist, but if he turns, it's much more difficult. This is true for the sword, and it is also true with the shield, because the shield has a flat surface and has an edge. So I can strike the flat with my edge to make the shield rotate, and he cannot do anything to counter that.
Okay, two other biomechanics principles we're going to use are simply space and time. Space is a matter of reach. For example, if I'm standing here in front of Þorgeirr and I want to kill him, two targets I could choose are maybe the head, because he would be dead on the spot, or he has his leg forward, so I will try to strike at the leg. So if I try that, it doesn't work. But as I told you, he's taller than me, so maybe it's because he has longer reach, so we try the opposite. Doesn't work either. And that's just a matter of simple geometry. It's because your sword is attached to your hand and your hand is attached to your shoulder. So if you want to use techniques that require reach, you have to do them at shoulder height, because that's where you have most reach. Whenever you go higher or lower, you lose reach. Now, after space comes time. This is a notion that comes from Italian fencing theory. They call that tempo, which means in Italian time. And the idea behind that is that your body requires some time to perform an action, and once you have started your action, you have to finish it. So if you want to be faster than your opponent, it's not about rushing, it's about being efficient and packing as much useful actions in a single tempo. So for example, Þorgeirr will strike at me, I parry, and I strike at him. So the tempos were 1, 2. And each of us made one action in each tempo, so I didn't gain any advantage. Now, if he's striking at me, and that was one tempo, in one tempo, I parried and thrust. So from the other side, maybe we do it again. Here. And I wasn't faster in my motion than I was before. I was just more efficient because I did two things in one tempo.
Right, so that was the four principles of biomechanics that we will use. We can use some other things now. We can use the fact that later medieval guys, fencing masters actually, wrote books on how to fight. And these books, we have them, and we can study them. The problem is, apart from the fact that these guys were not Vikings, is also that these guys did not use the Viking sword and shield. They used different weapons. But we can try to find weapons that were similar and find some principle in these fighting techniques that we can apply to the Viking sword and shield. So the first treatise we will study is from the end of the 13th century, named by a monk called Bjornsson, which talked about the sword and the buckler. The buckler is a small shield like this, so it is like a Viking shield actually. It is a round shield with an iron boss and a center-held grip. The only problem, as you can see, is that it is a little bit smaller, obviously. Now we have a second manuscript that we can use. It's from a German master from the 15th century named Hans Talhofer. He uses a dueling shield which is absolutely enormous. You will see the illustration there. Basically it is a huge board held by a center grip that goes all the length of the shield. To have an idea of the size, if you don't see it, you put two Viking shields, one on top of the other, and you have the size of the dueling shield. So it is, once again, a dueling shield, a center-held shield, but this time it is way too big. Okay, so one shield too small, one shield too big. Okay, there is one last treatise actually that has the shield of the good size. It is from Italian masters, from the Bolognese school of fighting in the 16th century, which has a round shield from about this size. The problem is, well, it is not held by a center grip, it is held by straps to the arm. So it is a little different in use, but still we have 3 treatises, 2 treatises with the proper grip on the shield, but not the right size, so that they will show us the dynamics of the shield. And the last sources are the proper size of the shield, but not the proper way to hold it, and this will mainly give us the openings we have with the shield.
Okay, now if you want to start to learn how to fight with weapons, the first question of course is how to hold them. So maybe we have a volunteer here who didn't attend any of our lectures previously, who would like to demonstrate a guard. Any volunteer, please? Yeah. Okay, here we go. So here, take a sword and a shield and stand in front of me as if you were ready to fight me. We're not going to fight, don't worry, but no, prepare as if you were going to fight. How would you stand? For example, that's not that bad because his sword hand is protected, it's behind him, he's holding the shield slightly away from his body, so angulation makes that he protects actually a larger part of his body than if it was flat against his body. But now remember, we talked about edge and flat, and this is presenting me his flat, so very easily I can, you know, just move the shield and open that on the sides, and I could exploit those openings. So thanks for the demonstration. No problem. Yeah. Now Þorgeirr will demonstrate several guards that you might or might not have seen, and we'll comment on what is good about them and what is not that good. So we'll start with that guard. So this guard is what you see most of the time in reenactment battles, and it's a very good guard for its purpose because the rules in reenactment for safety reasons are no hits to the shin bone, no hits to the hand and the lower arm, no other hits to the head, that such kind of hits if you have a helmet. So basically the only allowed targets are very well protected here. But now of course in a real fight you don't have these rules, so it can end up with a cut arm, in a thrust to the face because you have a quite large motion to make to protect your head. It can same for your lower legs. And remember, this shield is not that sturdy, so if it's lying flat against your body, of course this time edge and flat will not work because of course here again the body will not move. But if I have a spear or an axe or a good sword, I can thrust at that shield, probably get through and get into his body, which obviously is not what he wants. So the solution here, no, that's an extrapolation maybe of what you have just showed us. The shield is really away from the body, so the angle of protection is very good. The sword hand is very well protected, the head too, the legs are out of reach, but here comes the problem of edge and flat, and that's a rubbish defense actually. Now we'll tackle this problem by using the edge of the shield. So now you could think that the shield covers him less than it did before, but actually because of angle I'm striking from this side, so the fact that he's presenting the edge doesn't change much and he's still quite well protected. The only targets that are left here are to the head, so he will have to raise his shield a little bit to protect his head, and to the leg. And that's the wounds we find most often in skeletons. There are blows to the head or to the legs, and we even found at a battle, I think it was Hastings, a skeleton where the 2 shin bones are cut in a single blow. That's quite ghastly. So now the solution to protect those targets will be to have the shield as far out as you can, to have a large cone of protection, as we call that. Be ready to defend the head and keep the legs out of reach. And it just happens that it's exactly the kind of guard that Ludger, the German monk, is showing us in his treatise. All the guards are very similar to what we have just shown you, where the guys are holding their small buckler far in front of them, the sword too, to intercept incoming attacks, and keeping the head behind the weapons to be protected, and the legs far out to keep them out of reach.
Now this was the position of the shield. What do I do with my sword? Well, the short answer is if I have a good shield position, I can put my sword wherever I want. It will be nice. So I could, for example, put it over my shoulders, so that's resting nicely, not so tiring. I could also put it near my shield to add some support to the shield against rotation, for example. Or I could hide it behind the shield so that I can attack both left and right targets and he won't know where I'm coming. There are just a few little mistakes that you really don't want to do with your sword. The first one is simply striking him like that. Because, as we mentioned, the Viking sword has very small crossguard. This is an indication that they didn't, contrarily to bigger crossguard and elaborated hilt later on in the medieval age and Renaissance, they didn't need crossguards. That means that their fighting styles did protect the hand naturally. So it is very important in sword and shield fighting that your hand always stay behind your shield. So if I'm attacking Eirikr, I will attack like this. Here my sword hand is protected. This is actually a principle that is present in the 3 of the treatises that we studied. There is even one illustration in one of them when you see someone making these mistakes actually, and you see clearly the arm overextended and the weapon and the hand lying on the floor in a pool of blood. That's quite gruesome. German art for you. So this is the first principle. The second principle is if he stands in a guard in front of me, as we mentioned, actually I can strike wherever I want. I will not be able to hit him. The only thing I will be able to hit is his shield. Now that's physics for you. I have a sharp piece of steel. He has planks of wood. If I strike at his shield, what will happen? Yeah, it will not break his shield, not quickly, but my sword will bite into the shield and get stuck in there. So I just neutralize my weapon. That's completely stupid. So the conclusion to that is that the main weapon in Viking and in sword and shield fighting, the main weapon is not the sword, it is a shield. The sword is only here to strike when I have the opening and I know that I'm going to kill him. Before it's not useless but dangerous. So I need to use the shield to create the openings first. How well do you that? How to do that?
Yeah, actually there's one first opening that I could use that is already here, but it's out of reach. If I come close and for some reason he's not attacking, his left side is completely covered by the shield, obviously. The right side is much less covered, except that if I attack just like this, obviously it doesn't work. So what I will have to do is to cover myself on the right side, which yeah, it's my right side, and control his weapons to avoid that. So what I will do is make my shield rotate, for example by striking it with my pommel, keep his weapons here out of the way, and then I can strike, thrust, or hit at the head or something.
Now this is using the rotation of the shield to his advantage. I can use the rotation of his shield to his disadvantage. Now, as we saw, there is a principle of edge against flat. I can make his shield rotate. Now the only problem is that if he's in a proper stance, as we saw, it does not present me his flat. It's presenting me his edge. So I cannot just strike here because what happens is both our shields will rotate, or neither one will rotate. So I need to do something to gain a little extra advantage for that. And this is very simple actually. I don't want my shield to rotate that way. So I will simply rotate it so it cannot rotate this way but this way. And if I do that, his shield will rotate. Here I am completely protected from blows from his side and his shield arm is completely uncovered. So once again, I will strike, and go out. I don't want to rush in any closer than that, because he has lost his arm, I have lost nothing, so the end of the fight should be easy. No point in rushing in just now.
What can I do to counter this is quite simple. I wouldn't say easy, but simple. Namely, I can rotate my shield too, change my axis of rotation. So if I was standing here and my shield could rotate this way, if I just tilt my arm, it will not rotate the way he wants it to rotate. So when he strikes at my shield, and here we end up flat against flat, and none of us had the advantage.
Now, this is a quite nice position and very interesting. It is the contact of weapon is called the bind in fencing treatises, and it is a very important notion with the sword and buckler. The bind is usually used with the contact of the swords, because this is the main weapon in the other treatises, and it is very important because in the bind I can feel the pressure from the pressure and the contact of the blade. I can feel what the opponent is doing. I can feel if he's strong, if he's weak, if he's going somewhere else, and I am much quicker to react to this stimuli than what I see. So here in the treatises we have the bind of the swords. Here obviously we don't have bind of the sword, we have bind of the shield, but it's exactly the same principle. We have contact of his shields, and this is important that, as you can see, or perhaps not, I don't see anything. I don't see him, so I need to rely on feeling the pressure he puts on my shield to understand what is going on. Yeah, I felt him going up. I went up too and cut at the opening low. Against. Okay, went high, I ducked and cut at his legs.
Last thing we can use, because of course this was a bit extreme, like an example, you don't go fighting just pushing the shields and trying to create the opening and strike only at the very end with the sword. You can use the sword a bit more actively, and for that actually what you will do is use the two small openings that we had when standing in guard, that were just in reach or just out of reach to the head and to the leg. So maybe you will not hit that, but it might make your opponent react to your strikes. When you are here in the bind of shields, you will be striking high and low to test your opponent's defense, test his reactions, and maybe help creating openings. But because even if his defense is good, he might move his defense when he sees a sword coming at him, because of course having sharp steel coming at you is a bit more, let's say, impressive than just wooden planks.
Now the other thing with this high and low switching is that he's switching with his sword, which is light and nimble. I'm trying to protect myself with my shield, which is still a big piece of wood. It is heavier than the sword. So what's going to happen is he's gonna be faster than me eventually. So he's gonna cut me eventually. So I need to do something to protect myself against that too. And fortunately, the Italian masters tells us exactly this kind of technique to protect ourselves. There are two openings, I have two weapons. So one weapon will guard the high opening, namely the shield, and the low opening will be protected by the sword. And here he can bash all he wants. I don't care.
Okay, so those were the core principles of the Viking sword and shield fighting. First, the shield is the main weapon and is working to create the openings by using the rotation around the center grip. Second, to feel where the openings are going to be created, you use the feeling in the bind of shields. And third, you use the openings high and low to force your opponent's reaction and help create the openings and maybe be faster than him in this high and low race. And now we'll show you several techniques that are more elaborate and that come from those three treatises and that we have adapted to the Viking sword and shield.
So the first technique is actually the continuation from this parry, because here I just protected myself, now I need to kill him. So how would I do that? So he strikes and I protect myself. Here I have a very small opening between his sword and his shield. If we do that from the other side, here I have a very small opening here, right? If he's a even decent fighter, he will have quite an easy time blocking this. But actually, I do not expect to be able to hit him with that attack. What I want him to do is create a bigger opening, because to defend himself, he will have to lower his weapons, which means that his head will be uncovered. Here. And here his head is uncovered. I will not try to strike it just now, because he could again raise his weapon, but I will use the fact that my shield is higher than his weapons to control them. Now, for the whole technique, here I am confident that he cannot do anything to counter that. Yeah. Right, so this was a technique that threatened low to hit high. Now we can use similar techniques that will threaten left or right to create the openings. So again, this is an Italian technique. I will begin by thrusting here to divert his weapons to his right, now to his left, and here is wide open at the middle. Once again.
Yeah, from the other side maybe.
Here, and here I come.
Note that what's very important here is tempo, because he has to control my sword arm with his shield and strike at the same time. If he doesn't, I still have a chance to save my life, because what could happen is this. Come on. Here. If he comes too late, we end up in a quite symmetrical situation, with both the sword arm blocked, bad bruise to the shoulder, but I'm still alive. So he has to use tempo and do the shield bash and the attack at the same time. So what we have seen here, that if you separate your weapons, basically you're in a very bad situation. And we'll see just now another technique which separates the weapons. And this technique comes from Þorgeirr's treatise. Actually, it's not a technique that he's teaching. He's saying that you shouldn't do it, because it's a bad technique that for what he calls general fighters. So maybe people who are less educated than a German monk, so maybe some Vikings, we don't know. And also because with the small buckler, this technique is very easy to counter. But we have tested it with the Viking shield, and the counter doesn't work, which means that the first technique works pretty nicely. So it's a technique against someone who is threatening you with the point extended as much as possible, because he doesn't want you to approach. What I'm going to do is strike. This time I will create, it's an exception, I will create the opening with my sword. I will strike at his blade with mine, here, still covering my hand of course. And since it's heavy steel against heavy steel, you have seen that his sword went out of the way. And now I have a very small opening here. I don't want to go at his body, because his shield could be coming at my wrist or something. So I will just make a small and efficient cut to his sword arm here. Just this. And this should be sufficient, because if I cut some tendons here, he's very likely to drop his sword. And without a sword, well, he's basically done for. Another technique coming from Þorgeirr's treatise is what he calls mutatio gladii in Latin, which is the mutation of the sword. This mutation of the sword means that if someone is pressing you out of the line to control the line and be able to strike at you, instead of trying to counter that with your weak, because you're anyway too weak to counter, you will just yield to the pressure, come from the other side, snap him down, and now you have the line to cut. Of Of course, in our case, it's a contact of not a bind of blades, but a bind of shields. So we'll do a mutation of the shields instead. So if, for example, at some point in the bind of shield, we come in a situation where he has his shield against mine, over mine, and is ready to strike at me. What I'm going to do, instead of trying to resist by lifting my shield against his, which is nearly impossible, I will change the sense of rotation of my shield, like previously, yield to the pressure, and now the pressure he's applying to the lower part of my shield will make it rotate this way, and basically he will be covering his weapons himself. So if you do that again, and now he's wide open for a cut.
Now, let us go back to the small targets of the head and the legs. So the legs we talked about with this parry. Now for the head. There is one way to strike at the head even if he's trying to parry it with his sword. We use here with his shield, sorry. Here we use angulation again. The fact is, if I try to strike at him, he does not need to make a very big movement to cover him, because since my hand is lower than my point, he has quite a great margin to protect his head. But I can invert that by simply raising my hand, and here I can go over his shield and strike at him. So this is what we call the hanging blow. We can do it in the first attempt. I strike here, and it is a cut or a draw cut if I want. But the problem of this technique in a single and first attack is actually that my hand, since I need to raise it, it's a little bit unprotected here. Here my hand is slightly unprotected. It is difficult to reach, but it's still possible, so it is dangerous. But there are some situations when this trick is absolutely very good. For example, if he tries to strike at me with the crossed strike, like this. So I will need to protect my right side. I will do it with the shield by simply passing my shield to my right side too. So here, there. And here I don't have the opening, that way. But I can use a little gap between the shield to thrust it. On the other side, here.
Now, the last two techniques we'll show you come from the Þorgeirr treatise, from the big shields, and these techniques will show us how to make this small gap become bigger and bigger so that the second attack from the defender can be easier and more efficient. And for this, Þorgeirr uses what in German fencing is called Nachreisen, which is traveling after, and the principle uses space and time. For example, if we just do that with swords, he's attacking me, I let the blow pass through me, and I come back with riposte. So, with shields, we'll do again with the cross strike, and this time instead of going at him with my shield to parry, I will retreat. So it will end up like here. I have rotated my shield to protect myself on this side, but now the gap is much bigger, and I can strike at his sword arm. From the other side, it will be, and I come back. So retreat and come back, and we can make this even bigger, this gap, and that's really a fancy technique where Þorgeirr is advertising, come to my fencing school and you will learn such cool tricks. But that would be probably quite difficult to manage in a fight, but if you practice and practice and practice, it becomes possible. So this time I will really trust my distance and timing, and I will not even parry with the shield, but maybe I just put it against my body to prevent from anything bad happening. And if I'm not that confident, I will connect his attack with my sword, so that was something like, okay, so that was one tempo, my shield was idle. For my second tempo, my shield can move, and look at what I can do. Bam! Both of his weapons are out of the way, and he's completely open for me to cut him absolutely wherever I want. Okay, so these techniques were the results so far of our research on Viking sword and shield fighting. We hope you enjoyed that, and we hope we'll be able to present you new stuff when we come back next year, if we can come back next year. So if you have questions about Viking sword and shield or about anything else about fencing and historical martial arts, we're here to answer your questions as far as we'll be able to, but we hope you enjoyed that, and thanks for your attention.